8 Challenges to Understanding the Bible. Welcome to another video in our series on how to interpret the Bible. Today we will be discussing 4 of the 8 challenges we need to be aware of that prevent us from properly understanding the Bible. These challenges are what scholars call noise or gaps in understanding, and these are anything that interrupts the flow of communication between the sender and receiver. These 8 components come from Fuhr and Kustenberger's book called Inductive Bible Study. You might find these worded differently or see more or less of these in different places, but generally speaking, this is a great way to encompass the challenges or gaps in understanding we will face when interpreting Scripture. These 8 challenges fall under one of 3 larger categories. They are the historical, literary, and theological gaps that exist between the ancient text of Scripture and the modern reader seeking to understand it. Let's check them out. The historical challenges include 1. The time gap. 2. The geographical gap. 3. The cultural gap. The literary challenges include 4. The language gap. 5. The literary gap. The theological challenges include 6. The supernatural gap. 7. The theological gap. 8. The appropriation gap. The time gap. At times it can be hard to embrace the fact that people living in different times than us were living under some extremely different situations, and even laws than we live in. We only have to go back 200 years or so in our own country to see this. Horse thieves, for instance, were on par with how we would view child molesters, and their penalty was way more severe than anything we would be comfortable doling out today. Wikipedia describes one such law passed in Pennsylvania. It says this: in Pennsylvania, the Act to Increase the Punishments of Horse Stealing law was passed in 1780. The law ran as follows. The first offense, the convicted, shall stand in the pillory for 1 hour, and shall be publicly whipped on his, her, or their bare backs, with 39 lashes, well laid on, and at the same time shall have his, her, or their ears cut off, and nailed to the pillory, and for the second offense shall be whipped and pilloried in like manner, and be branded on the forehead in a plain and visible manner with the letters H.T. Of course, this reads nothing like what our justice system does to criminals in our day and age. That is why, when reading certain things that happened in Scripture, it might seem quite disturbing or unjust to our modern mind, and might tempt us to believe that it never could have been true. The geographical gap. Bridging this gap can help us gain perspective on what their daily routine might have been like. For instance, during New Testament times, much of their area was rain-depleted and desert. Water was hugely important. It was also very mountainous in many parts, since they didn't have vehicles, cities, jobs, and everything was much closer to each other. Travel was predominantly by foot or on donkey if you were lucky enough to have one. Often their trips between cities would take days. This means that they would sleep next to the road at night, and thieves were always a concern. One way they combated this was to jump into a group to walk together to sort of protect each other. Knowing this might not change our doctrine much, but it helps us understand some of their sayings and comparisons better when they relate it to walking with God or some of the parables we read about. It was just a real part of their existence. Most of us will never take a 70-mile walking trip to visit family or for important religious festivals or whatnot, especially with young kids in tow. However, that is the approximate distance between Judea and Galilee, and many Jews would make that journey for various reasons. The cultural gap. This is a big one. Without understanding the culture of the Bible's original writers, we are sure to miss much of what is being communicated, or to completely misunderstand the author's intended message. Foot washing was a practice extended to guests in the Hebrew home. It was usually performed by a lowly servant and was a show of humility and honor to the guest. Sandals were worn for thousands of years. Roads were hot, dusty, and muddy during the wet season. Feet were always in need of refreshment and cleaning when entering a home. The first time we read of this ritual is when Abraham offered to wash the feet of his 3 guests in Genesis 18:4. Jesus washed the disciples' feet and then said this in John 13:14. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too ought to wash one another's feet. 15. For I have given you an example. You should do just as I have done for you. 16. I tell you the solemn truth. The slave is not greater than his master, nor is the one who is sent as a messenger. Holy kiss. In many nations, Israel being one, it is customary for men to greet male friends or relatives with a kiss on both cheeks. so it was in Jesus' time. This expression of welcome was particularly practiced when a guest entered a home. The master of the house would greet his guest, then seal it with a welcome kiss, first on the right cheek, then the left. In Luke 7, Jesus was invited to dine with Simon the Pharisee. There were many religious hypocrites there as well. A woman entered and wept tears on Jesus' feet. She then dried them with her hair and kissed his feet over and over. The Pharisees were appalled because she was known as a woman of ill repute. Jesus reminded them they did not kiss him when he entered, wash his feet, nor anoint his head with oil, as this humble woman was doing. Other customs that we don't share are arranged marriages, the dowry, stoning someone to death, whipping to shred the flesh, trading sandals to complete an agreement, and levirate marriage, to name a few. The language gap. Many Christians today hold to the view that the Bible is without error and inspired by God, who co-authored the Bible with around 40 people. If that is true, why should the language gap be one of the challenges we face? Many will mistakenly also attribute inerrancy to our English translations. A better way to understand inerrancy is to understand that it is only ascribed to the original, human author, written manuscript. For instance, the only inspired version of the book of Colossians is the book that Paul wrote. Amazingly, conservative scholars don't even consider the original language copies made by scribes to be inspired. As soon as we move away from the writings of the original author, we start to use the word accurate instead of inerrant. How accurate is this or that original language manuscript? We also use the word accurate when speaking about all Bible translations, whether our English ones, Chinese Bibles, etc. The popular website gotquestions.org wrote an article about this as well. The title is this: How does the translation process impact the inspiration, inerrancy, and infallibility of the Bible? This was their summary answer. Are translations of the Bible inspired and inerrant? The answer is no, they are not. God nowhere extends the promise of inspiration to translations of His Word. While many of the translations available today are superb in quality, they are not inspired by God and are not perfect. When we speak of inspiration, we are referring only to the process by which the original documents were composed. After that, the doctrine of the preservation of the Bible takes over. If God went to such great lengths to give us His Word, surely He would also take steps to preserve that Word unchanged. What we see in history is that God did exactly that. Fuhr and Kostenberger say this about the language gap. While quality Bible study can be performed through modern translations, it's nonetheless important to understand that some facets of meaning or subtle nuances may at times be lost when students of Scripture don't engage with the original languages of the Bible. Language is a very complex phenomenon that cannot be defined by alphabet, vocabulary, grammar, and syntax alone. It's intricately tied to culture and the people who speak a given idiom. Linguistic conventions are dynamic, ever developing along with those who use them. Words can be translated from one language into another, but often only imperfectly, for no two languages can fully convey all aspects of meaning tied to its particulars. In short, the original languages of the Bible should rightly take precedence over any given translation. You'll be able to bridge the language gap as you read and compare translations, engage in original language word study through the use of various reference tools, and follow exegetical conversations in the better commentaries. Summary: even though these challenges are real, the good news is that God initiated the relationship with us and is actually more concerned about connecting with us than we often are with Him. These challenges mentioned aren't meant to discourage you, but to make you aware of your need to at times redirect your interpretation methods. In the next video, we will discuss the last 4 forms of noise we need to be aware of.